Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight. Wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment, I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I never thought I'd end up here. Not in a town this small, not in a house this old, and definitely not alone. But life has a way of unraveling in directions you never see coming. One minute you have a plan. The next, you're signing a lease for a place you found on a last-minute listing because your old life has burned to the ground. The house wasn't much to look at, but it was cheap, and right now that mattered more than anything. 2 stories, peeling white paint, a sagging porch that creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it for the first time. The landlord, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, handed me the keys with little fanfare. "Some quirks," he muttered, scratching at the gray stubble on his chin. "Creaky floors. Pipes groan sometimes. It's an old place, you know how it is." I nodded. I didn't know how it was. Old houses make noise. Drafts sneak in through windows that don't quite shut all the way. The foundation shifts and settles. It was all normal. I stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like the place had been closed up for too long. Dust floated in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The wooden floors, scratched and worn, whispered under my steps. The house had a strange way of carrying sound. My own movements echoed back at me, slightly off, as if I weren't alone. I shook off the feeling. It was just a house. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked slowly, stretching the process out to give myself something to do. The silence was thick, heavier than I was used to. Back in the city, noise was constant. Traffic, voices, the hum of life just outside your door. Here, the quiet was absolute. At night, I lay in bed and listened to the house breathe. Creaks, occasional pops, the wind whistling through the eaves. I told myself I'd get used to it. It wasn't until the 3rd night that I noticed something odd. I woke up, disoriented, the room too dark. I reached for my phone to check the time, 2:47 a.m. The house was silent. But as I lay there, heart still settling from the strange feeling that had pulled me from sleep, I became aware of a sound. A slow, rhythmic creaking. Like footsteps. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was coming from downstairs. Someone walking, one deliberate step at a time. I sat up, every muscle tensed. The sound continued moving through the house. Not hurried. Not searching. Just moving. I told myself it was nothing. The house settling. The wind. Something ordinary. But I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning I met my neighbor. Mrs. Holloway, a woman in her 70s with thin lips and sharp eyes, was sweeping her porch when I stepped outside for some air. She eyed me over the top of her glasses. "You're the new tenant," she said. Not a question. I nodded. She pursed her lips. "Hope you last longer than the last one." That made me pause. The last one? She kept sweeping. Didn't even last a month. Left in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no moving truck. Just ran. My skin prickled. Why? Mrs. Holloway glanced at me, her gaze unreadable. Said the house was cursed. A laugh caught in my throat. Cursed? She shrugged. Said she heard things. Saw things. But old houses do that. They creak, they settle. People let their imaginations get the best of them. I nodded slowly, but her words clung to me as I went back inside. That night I listened, and the house answered. The next few days passed in a blur of half-unpacked boxes, takeout dinners, and restless nights. I tried to settle into a routine, but something about the house made it difficult. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me. Every creak and groan set me on edge. I told myself it was just nerves. A new place always took time to adjust to, but the feeling lingered. The footsteps came again. It was the 4th night when I heard them more clearly. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of cleaning. The house still smelled faintly of dust, but I had started to get used to it. I drifted off quickly, only to wake up to that same sound. Creak. Pause. Creak. It was distinct, deliberate. Footsteps crossing the downstairs hallway. I sat up, heart hammering. The sound moved toward the staircase. I held my breath as it reached the bottom step. And then, nothing. The silence stretched, suffocating. I strained to listen, waiting for the next step. But it never came. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to get out of bed. My body felt too heavy, my limbs sluggish with dread. I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight, the bright beam cutting through the darkness as I crept to the bedroom door. I hesitated before opening it. The hallway outside was empty. Cold air brushed against my skin, making me shiver. The wooden floor groaned under my weight as I moved toward the stairs. I pointed the light down. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. I swallowed hard and forced a shaky laugh. I was being ridiculous. I went downstairs anyway, checking the locks, making sure the front door was still secure. It was. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I lingered in the hallway for a moment, staring into the dark corners of the house. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. But there was nothing there. Just an old house making old house noises. I told myself that, over and over, but I still slept with the light on. The next day, I ran into Mrs. Holloway again. She was tending to her garden, her hands buried in the soil, but she looked up as I approached. "Everything all right?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I hesitated. I wanted to brush it off, to say everything was fine, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, "What exactly happened to the last tenant?" She sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. Like I said, she ran. Said she couldn't take it anymore. I frowned. Take what? Mrs. Holloway studied me. She claimed the house was haunted. Said she heard things, saw things. Kept waking up with bruises she couldn't explain. A chill ran through me. Bruises? She nodded. Like something had grabbed her in her sleep. I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You don't believe that, do you?" Mrs. Holloway shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just matters what you believe." I didn't have an answer for that. That night, I locked my bedroom door and waited. The house didn't wait long to test me. That night, I lay in bed with the door locked, the blankets pulled up to my chin. My phone sat on the nightstand, flashlight app open just in case. The clock read 2:31 a.m. when I heard it. The creaking. This time there was no mistaking it. It wasn't just the house settling or the wind rattling the eaves. These were footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Moving through the downstairs hallway. I held my breath, listening. Creak. Pause. Creak. They were coming closer. The steps reached the foot of the stairs and my stomach clenched. Slowly, one by one, they ascended. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the noise away. Maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. Maybe it was all in my head. But the sound continued. Each step sent a shudder through the floorboards, growing louder, heavier. By the time they reached the landing, my pulse was hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. And then, nothing. Silence. The kind that pressed against my ears, thick and unnatural. I stayed frozen, staring at the dark shape of my bedroom door, barely visible in the dim glow from my phone. The air felt wrong. Heavy. Like something was standing just on the other side, waiting. Then the handle turned. I stopped breathing. It was slow, deliberate, the soft scrape of metal as it twisted ever so slightly, testing the lock. I felt a scream claw up my throat, but I swallowed it down, too terrified to make a sound. The handle jiggled harder, as if whatever was outside was growing impatient. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence stretched, thick with something unseen. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Finally, I worked up the nerve to move. I reached for my phone, my hand shaking as I flipped on the flashlight and aimed it at the door. The light caught the brass knob. It was still, unmoved. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, exhaustion weighed on me like a damp blanket. The night replayed over and over in my mind, the footsteps, the doorknob twisting. I needed answers. I spent the day researching the house. The landlord had been vague about its history, and I hadn't asked many questions when I signed the lease. But now I wanted to know everything. I started at the local library. It was small, tucked between a diner and a hardware store, the kind of place where the librarian knew everyone's name. I approached the front desk. The woman behind it, a thin, gray-haired lady with wire-rimmed glasses, peered up at me. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. I just moved into a house on Hawthorne Street, number 16. I was wondering if you had any old records on it. Her face changed. Not much, just a slight shift in her expression. But I noticed. "You're living there?" she asked, her voice quieter. I nodded. "Why?" She adjusted her glasses, then stood. Follow me? I did, my heart pounding. She led me to a back room lined with shelves of old newspapers and town records. She ran her fingers along a row of folders, then pulled one out, laying it on the table. This house has a history, she said. I opened the folder. The first article was dated 1956. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Local man vanishes from home. No signs of forced entry. I scanned the article. A man named Arthur Bell, the house's original owner, had disappeared without a trace. The police found his belongings untouched. His front door locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. He was never seen again. The next article was from 1972. Family flees home in middle of night, claims house is cursed. The article detailed how a couple and their 2 children had abruptly left, abandoning their furniture and personal belongings. They refused to speak publicly about what had driven them out. I flipped through more pages. The pattern continued. 1989. Another disappearance. 2003. A tenant hospitalized after suffering a breakdown, claiming something lived in the house. I sat back, my skin cold. The librarian watched me. They say Arthur Bell was obsessed with the occult, she said quietly. He believed he could open doors to other worlds. He performed rituals in that house. No one knows what he was trying to summon. I swallowed. And no one ever figured out what happened to him? She shook her head. Just gone. Like the house swallowed him whole. A chill ran through me. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. When I got home, the house felt different. Or maybe I did. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of something unseen, something waiting. And as I stood in the hallway staring up at the darkened staircase, I knew one thing for certain. I was not alone. I should have packed my things that night. I should have left just like the others before me. But I didn't. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe, just maybe, the house already had its hooks in me. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, my mind racing with everything I had read at the library. The disappearances, the families who fled in terror, Arthur Bell and his obsession with the occult. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the walls, listening. The house felt charged. The air crackled with something unseen. It was the same feeling you get when you stand too close to a thunderstorm, that low hum of static in the air. I tried to eat, but every bite tasted like dust. I tried to watch TV, but the voices sounded distant, warped, as if they were coming from the bottom of a deep well. By the time I went to bed, exhaustion clung to me like a wet cloth. I locked my door again. It didn't make me feel any safer. The dream started that night. At first, it was just darkness. A vast, endless void. Then, slowly, I became aware of something else. Whispers. Not words, not exactly. Just hushed, urgent murmurs, overlapping and circling me. I turned in the dream, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. Just shadows shifting in the blackness. And then, a presence. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. Something behind me, standing too close. Breathing against my neck. I tried to move. I couldn't. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, suffocating me. And then, in the midst of them, a single voice cut through. He let it in. My eyes flew open. I was awake. In my bed. My skin was damp with sweat. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. The room was silent. For a long moment, I just lay there, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of the dream. But then I heard it. A sound so soft I almost thought I imagined it. Breathing. Right next to my bed. I went completely still, every muscle in my body locking up. My ears strained against the darkness. A slow inhale. A ragged, shuddering exhale. The kind of breathing that didn't belong to me. It was close. So close I could feel it. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to look at the empty space beside me. And then the mattress dipped. Like someone had just sat down. I bolted upright, reaching blindly for my phone. My fingers fumbled against the screen, and when I finally turned on the flashlight, I swung it wildly around the room. Nothing. The space beside me was empty. The air was still. But the feeling lingered. That heavy, oppressive sense of being watched. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I did the one thing I had been avoiding since moving in. I went into the basement. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that it was just an ordinary house. That there was nothing waiting for me in the dark corners. The basement door was in the kitchen, half hidden behind an old pantry shelf. The landlord had told me there was nothing down there but old pipes and some leftover junk from previous tenants. Still, as I stood in front of it, something inside me screamed not to go. I ignored it. The door creaked as I pulled it open. A narrow staircase stretched down into darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. I clicked on the flashlight and started down. The steps groaned under my weight. The walls were rough stone lined with cobwebs. The deeper I went, the colder it became. My breath came out in short, uneven puffs. At the bottom, I swept the light around. It was just a basement. Low ceilings. Dirt floor. A few rusted shelves stacked with forgotten junk. But then my flashlight caught something. A door. It was set into the far wall, barely visible in the dim light. An old wooden thing warped with age with a rusted latch. I swallowed hard. My pulse thundered in my ears. Something about that door felt wrong. The air around it was different. Heavier. My fingers twitched toward the latch, an awful curiosity twisting in my stomach. Then, a whisper. Soft. Barely there. But close. Right behind me. Don't. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. The basement was empty. Silent. But I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. I backed away from the door, my breath coming fast. I turned and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I locked it, and then I did something I should have done days ago. I started packing. I packed like someone was chasing me, clothes shoved into bags, dishes left in the sink. I didn't care about organizing, didn't care about leaving anything behind. I just needed to go. But the house wasn't going to let me leave that easily. As I stuffed the last of my things into a duffel bag, the air around me thickened. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting, watching. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my breathing, on the sound of my zipper as I pulled it shut. My fingers trembled, but I forced myself to keep going. The keys were already in my pocket. All I had to do was walk out the front door. Simple. I grabbed my bag and turned toward the hallway. And stopped. The basement door was open. I knew I had locked it. I was sure of it. But now it stood ajar, the darkness inside stretching into the hallway like an open mouth. Something shifted down there. A rustling sound, soft and slow. I took a step back, heart hammering. The air was ice cold, my breath coming out in short, visible puffs. Then the smell hit me. Damp earth, rusted metal, and underneath it all, something rotting. I backed up further, my pulse roaring in my ears. I reached for the doorknob behind me, fingers curling around the metal, but before I could twist it, a whisper. Well, hushed, but unmistakable. He let it in. The same words from my dream. A cold pressure pressed against my back like someone was standing right behind me, close enough to touch. I spun around, my vision swimming, expecting to see something, someone. But there was nothing. Just the empty hallway. The house was playing with me. I forced myself to move, gripping my bag tighter as I staggered toward the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, my pulse hammering in my skull. Then the lights flickered, and the footsteps started. Slow, heavy, coming from the second floor. I turned my head just enough to see the staircase. The steps creaked, one by one, like something was descending. But there was nothing there. The air around me thickened, pressing against my skin, my chest, my throat. My fingers slipped on the lock, too slick with sweat to grip properly. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. And then they stopped, right behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside, the cold night air slamming into my lungs like a punch to the chest. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark, empty. Waiting. I ran to my car, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and jammed the key into the ignition. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The engine roared to life. I didn't look at the house as I peeled out of the driveway. Didn't check the rearview mirror. Didn't let myself wonder what I might see if I did. I just drove. As fast and as far as I could. But even with miles between me and that house, I could still feel it. The weight of unseen eyes. The whisper of something that wasn't done with me yet. I didn't stop driving until the sun started creeping over the horizon. The sky was streaked with pale pink and orange, but there was no comfort in the light. My hands were still locked around the steering wheel, knuckles white, my heartbeat a dull, rhythmic pounding in my ears. I found a motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and a cracked parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was far from the house. That was all that mattered. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as she handed me the key. Room 107. I muttered a thank you, took my bag and locked myself inside. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and cleaning solution. The bedspread was stiff, the carpet worn thin. But at least it was real. I sat on the bed and buried my face in my hands. I was out. I had left. But the fear clung to me like a second skin. I could still hear the footsteps, still feel the cold breath on my neck. I hadn't imagined it. That house wasn't empty, and whatever was inside it, it wasn't done with me. I told myself I just needed sleep. That exhaustion was making everything worse. But when I closed my eyes, I was back in that house. The basement door open, the whisper curling through the dark. "You let it in." My eyes snapped open, breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was silent, the thin curtains barely moving. I was being paranoid. That was all. Just paranoia and lack of sleep. I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't even know who I was planning to call. The police? What would I even tell them? I sighed and opened my search history instead. The house's past was worse than I had thought. The first disappearance, Arthur Bell, was only the beginning. There were more before him. More after. People who went missing. People who lost their minds. People who ran. There was a pattern. Every decade or so, someone new moved in. And every time, something happened. Then I found something else. A journal. A scanned copy of an old handwritten book, linked in an obscure forum about haunted locations. It belonged to Arthur Bell. I clicked on the link, my heart pounding. The first page was dated July 4th, 1955. Asterisk, I hear them at night. The whispers. The footsteps. It watches me when I sleep. Asterisk. I swallowed hard and kept reading. Asterisk, it wants something. I thought I could control it, but I was wrong. I opened the door, but I cannot close it. Asterisk. My pulse hammered. Arthur had let something in. Something that never left. The last entry was dated October 12th, 1956. The day before he vanished. Asterisk, I cannot fight it any longer. I hear it calling me. I see it in the corners of the room. In the mirrors. In my dreams. Asterisk. It is hungry. The entry ended there. I closed the tab, my stomach twisting. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Arthur Bell hadn't just disappeared. The house had taken him. And it had tried to take me too. I needed to warn someone. But as I reached for my phone again, a chill crawled down my spine. The room was silent. Too silent. Then from the far corner, a creak, like a footstep. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The motel room was empty, but the air felt different. Heavy. Cold. Like the house had followed me. Like I had never left. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. The motel room felt wrong, as if the walls were pressing in, as if something unseen had curled into the corners, waiting. The air was thick, suffocating, and I found myself listening, just listening, for something to break the silence. A whisper, a breath, a footstep. But nothing came. And somehow that was worse. I paced the room, my nerves shot, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The motel's ancient heater clanked in the background, the only sound breaking the heavy stillness. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was safe. I had left the house. I had escaped. Hadn't I? I grabbed my phone again and scrolled back to Arthur Bell's journal. My thumb hovered over the last entry. It is hungry. I swallowed, my throat dry. I had read every word, but it felt incomplete, like there was more. Like I was missing something. I opened the forum thread where I had found the journal. The post was old, buried under years of forgotten discussions. But there was a comment below the original post. One I hadn't noticed before. It was from a user with a meaningless string of numbers for a name. And it simply said, "If you found this, it's too late. It follows you." I stared at the words, my heartbeat stuttering. No, that wasn't possible. I wasn't in that house anymore. It couldn't follow me. Could it? A sharp knock at the door made me jump so violently that I nearly dropped my phone. I spun toward the door, my pulse slamming against my ribs. Another knock. Louder this time. I took a breath and forced my legs to move. My fingers trembled as I unlatched the lock. I cracked the door open just enough to see outside. A man stood there, his face pale in the flickering glow of the motel's neon sign. He was older, mid-50s maybe, with graying hair and dark circles under his eyes. He looked at me like he knew me, like he had been expecting me. "You were in that house," he said. It wasn't a question. My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" He exhaled slowly, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid we were being watched. Then he turned back to me, his voice low. "My name's Daniel Grayson," he said. "And if you want to live, you need to listen to me." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "It doesn't stay in the house." My breath hitched. He nodded, grim. "It follows you." I opened the door wider. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing. How do you know? Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. Haunted. Because I lived there, he said. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his temples. I moved in 10 years ago, he said. Didn't last long. 2 weeks maybe. Thought I was losing my mind. The footsteps, the whispers, the dreams. He looked up at me. And then I left. Just like you. My stomach twisted. I sat down in the chair by the window, gripping the armrests. But you're okay, I said, more of a question than a statement. Daniel's jaw tightened. No one gets out clean, he said. I left, but it never really let me go. It follows. It waits. It doesn't forget. A heavy silence settled between us. I swallowed hard. What is it? Daniel shook his head. No one knows. Some say Arthur Bell summoned something into that house. Opened a door that was never meant to be opened. And whatever came through, it never left. A chill crawled up my spine. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. It feeds on fear. It wants you to be afraid. The more you fear it, the stronger it gets. I gripped the edge of the chair. So how do I stop it? His eyes darkened. You don't? A cold weight settled in my chest. Daniel stood and reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn notebook. He held it out to me. I kept records, he said. Everything I experienced. Everything I learned. I hesitated before taking it. The cover was scuffed, the pages yellowed with age. Read it, he said. You need to understand what you're dealing with. I nodded slowly. Daniel walked to the door but paused before opening it. He turned back to me, his expression grim. Don't stay in one place too long, he warned. It's already watching. Then he was gone. I locked the door behind him, my heart racing. I looked down at the notebook in my hands, and I knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't open Daniel's notebook right away. I stared at it for a long time, the worn cover rough against my fingertips. It felt heavier than it should have, like whatever was inside carried more than just words. Like it carried something alive. Outside, the motel's neon sign buzzed, flickering red against the curtains. The world felt distant, muted. I wasn't sure how much time had passed before I finally took a breath and flipped open the first page. Daniel's handwriting was jagged, frantic, like he had written it in a hurry. June 3rd, 2013. I hear it again. I thought I was safe. Thought leaving would be enough. But it's here. It found me. I swallowed hard and kept reading. June 5th, 2013. Woke up with bruises on my arms. Like fingers pressing too hard into my skin. I sleep with the lights on now. It doesn't help. My stomach twisted. June 9th, 2013. I saw it. In the corner of the room. It wasn't there, but it was a shadow that shouldn't exist. I blinked and it was gone. But I felt it watching. My hands trembled as I turned the page. June 12th, 2013. I think I understand now. It doesn't live in the house. The house is just a doorway. It attaches to you. Once you've seen it, once you've heard it, it never lets go. My breath hitched. Daniel had been living with this for over 10 years. Was that my future now? I turned the page again, but this time, something was different. The handwriting was messier, almost illegible. The words were frantic. The ink smudged like it had been written with shaking hands. June 15th, 2013. It spoke. I almost dropped the notebook. The next few lines were scrawled so violently that the pen had torn through the paper. Said my name. A chill slithered down my spine. I shut the notebook, pressing my palm against the cover as if that could keep whatever was inside from spilling out. The air in the motel room felt heavier, colder, like something had shifted, like I wasn't alone. I forced myself to breathe, to move. I stood up too fast, the blood rushing from my head, making my vision blur. I needed to leave. I grabbed my bag and shoved the notebook inside. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to go. But as I reached for the doorknob, the lights flickered. A faint click echoed through the room. The bathroom door. I hadn't touched it. It was open now. Just an inch. A crack of darkness splitting the pale tile inside. My pulse pounded. I stared at the gap, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't left it open. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then, from inside the bathroom, a whisper. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. My name. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. The door slammed shut, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart a wild, panicked drumbeat in my chest. The motel room was still behind me. Dark, silent, waiting. I swallowed hard and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. No, 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 no. I tried again. Click. Nothing. My pulse pounded in my ears. I slammed my palm against the dashboard. Come on. A cold breath of air brushed against my neck. I froze. Slowly, with every ounce of willpower I had left, I turned my head toward the rearview mirror. There was nothing there. But the back seat felt occupied. The air was different, thick and heavy, pressing against my skin. I wasn't alone. I sucked in a breath and turned forward again, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. My mind raced, screaming at me to move, to do something. But I couldn't move. I could only sit there, locked in place, listening. Then, a soft creak. The sound of someone shifting their weight. In the back seat, my stomach turned to ice. I didn't dare look. I reached for the door handle. My fingers brushed against the cold metal. Another shift. Closer. A whisper so quiet I barely heard it. You let it in. I lunged for the door handle, threw it open, and stumbled onto the pavement. I didn't stop moving. Didn't stop to breathe. I ran, my legs screaming, my vision blurring, my only thought to get away. I made it to the gas station across the street, collapsing against the side of the building. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. Daniel. I needed to call Daniel. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number he had scribbled on the notebook's last page, and hit dial. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, where are you? Daniel's voice was urgent, like he already knew. The motel? I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Something was in my car. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. Listen to me, he said. Get away from there. Now. I did, I whispered. No farther. I swallowed, forcing myself to move. My legs ached as I pushed off the wall. What does it want? I asked. Daniel hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. You. A shiver ran through me. I'll explain everything, he said. Just get to the diner on Route 6. I'll meet you there. The call ended. I didn't waste time. I ran. The diner on Route 6 was one of those places that looked like it had been frozen in time. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that probably hadn't worked in years, and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. It was nearly empty, just a lone trucker hunched over his plate of eggs and a waitress who looked half asleep as she wiped down the counter. I slid into the farthest booth, my back pressed against the cool leather. My hands were still shaking. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for Daniel. Outside, the night was thick, shadows pooling under the streetlights. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The bell above the door jingled, and I jerked my head up. Daniel stepped inside, his face lined with exhaustion, his eyes scanning the diner before landing on me. He walked over, slid into the seat across from me, and set his hands on the table. You okay? He asked, though we both knew the answer. I swallowed hard. What the hell is happening to me? Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. I told you. It doesn't stay in the house. My stomach twisted. So what does it do? He hesitated before answering. It attaches, he said finally. It gets inside your head. It starts slow, whispers, shadows, things that make you doubt yourself. But then it escalates. A cold knot formed in my gut. Escalates how? Daniel's jaw tightened. It learns you. It finds your fears. And then it feeds on them. I shuddered. I thought back to the basement door swinging open. The whisper in the motel bathroom. The feeling of something sitting behind me in my car. I never should have moved into that house, I muttered. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. Doesn't matter. It would have found you anyway. I frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Arthur Bell wasn't the first. And he wasn't the last. People have been running from this thing for decades. But running doesn't work. I gripped the edge of the table. Then what does? Daniel looked at me, his expression grim. You have to face it. A cold shiver ran through me. How? He hesitated. That's the part one haven't figured out. I stared at him. You've been living with this for 10 years and you don't know how to stop it? His eyes darkened. You think I haven't tried? He exhaled sharply. I left the house just like you did. I ran. But it doesn't matter where you go. It's with you now. I shook my head, my throat tight. There has to be a way. There was a way, Daniel said. Arthur Bell was close. He wrote about it. But he disappeared before he could finish. My chest tightened. Then we find out what he was trying to do. Daniel studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. The house, he said. Everything started there. Everything is there. He leaned forward, voice low. If we want answers, we have to go back. My blood ran cold. Go back. Back to that house. Every instinct screamed no. But deep down I knew he was right. Whatever Arthur Bell had started, whatever door he had opened, I had to close it, before it was too late. The drive back to the house was silent. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his fingers tapping a slow, anxious rhythm against his knee. I kept my grip tight on the wheel, my heart pounding with every mile that brought us closer. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. The further we drove, the heavier the air became. It was like something knew we were coming back, knew we were trying to stop it. By the time we pulled into the overgrown driveway, my stomach was in knots. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes staring back at me. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Last chance to change your mind," he muttered. I swallowed hard. No turning back now. We stepped out of the car. The moment my foot hit the ground, the air turned ice cold. Daniel noticed it too. "It knows we're here," he said. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself forward. The porch creaked under our weight as we approached the door. I reached for the handle. It swung open before I could touch it. A rush of frigid air curled around us. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's inviting us in." I didn't want the invitation, but I stepped inside anyway. The house felt different this time. The last time I was here, I had been trying to ignore what was happening, convincing myself it was just an old building with quirks. Now I saw it for what it was. The shadows were deeper. The air was thick, suffocating. The floorboards groaned as though something underneath them was shifting, waiting. I turned to Daniel. "Where do we start?" "The basement," he said. "Of course." I exhaled shakily, then moved forward. My steps felt heavier the closer I got to that door. It was already open. I peered down the stairs. The darkness was so thick it felt solid, swallowing the bottom half of the steps. Daniel flicked on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the black. "Let's go." We descended slowly, the stairs creaking beneath us. The air grew colder with every step. By the time we reached the bottom, I could see my breath in the dim light. And then we saw it. The symbols, carved into the stone foundation, etched into the wooden beams. Circles and lines, twisted shapes that made my stomach turn just looking at them. Daniel ran a hand over one of the markings. "This is what Arthur Bell was doing," he murmured. "This is how he opened the door." A door. Not a physical one. Something else. Something that let it in. My skin prickled. "Then how do we close it?" Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at something. A book. A small, leather-bound journal, half buried in dust. Arthur Bell's. Daniel picked it up, his fingers shaking as he flipped through the pages. Then he stopped. His face went pale. "What?" I asked. He swallowed hard, then turned the book toward me. I read the words aloud. "The door cannot be closed. It can only take another asterisk asterisk." The air around us dropped to freezing. A sound echoed through the basement. A low, rasping whisper. "One must stay." A shadow moved in the corner. Not a trick of the light. Not my imagination. Something else was down here with us. And it was hungry. The whisper coiled around us like smoke, slithering through the cold air. "One must stay." The words didn't come from a voice. They came from the walls, from the air itself. Daniel stiffened beside me, his fingers clenching around the edges of Arthur Bell's journal. His breathing was shallow, and when he turned to me, his eyes were wide with understanding. "This is why no one ever stops it," he whispered. "Because to close the door," he swallowed hard, "someone has to take its place." A sickening realization settled in my gut. Arthur Bell had known. He had always known. And instead of sacrificing himself, he had run just like everyone else. The air grew heavier, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The shadow in the corner moved. A shape just out of focus. Not human. Not right. It shifted closer, soundless, the darkness curling toward us like a tide. Daniel took a step back. "We need to get out of here." The basement door slammed shut. The flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped so fast my breath froze midair. Then the whisper came again, thick and crawling. "Choose." I turned to Daniel, my chest heaving. "There has to be another way." His face was pale. He shook his head. "No, this is the only way. This is why it never stops." His voice was trembling. "Because no one is willing to stay." The shadows twisted along the walls, stretching toward us. A choice. One of us had to stay. I could feel it now. The pull, the hunger, it wanted one of us to take its place. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He looked at the symbols carved into the walls, at the journal, at the thing waiting in the dark. Then he met my eyes. And I knew. Before I could react, he shoved the journal into my hands. Run? No. Asterisk run. Asterisk. The flashlight flickered out. A deafening screech filled the room. The shadows collapsed inward. And Daniel was gone. Not like he ran. Not like he disappeared into the darkness. 1 second he was there. The next there was nothing. The weight in the air lifted. The suffocating cold vanished. The shadows pulled back. And the basement door creaked open. I didn't move at first. My body was numb, my mind frozen. Then, finally, I forced my legs to move. I climbed the stairs in a daze, stepping into the empty house. The air was still. Silent. It was over. I walked outside into the night, the journal clutched in my shaking hands. I didn't look back. I never would. But as I reached my car, as I fumbled for the keys, I heard something. A whisper. Oh, familiar. Daniel's voice. From the basement. One must stay. I got in my car. I drove. And I never stopped running. Story 2. I should have known better than to take the cheapest option. The house was old, older than I'd realized when I first saw the listing online. The photos made it look charming in that rustic vintage kind of way, with ivy climbing up the stone exterior and warm wooden floors inside. It had history, the kind that made people talk about character instead of repairs. It was cheap, which was all that mattered at the time. I moved in on a gray afternoon, unloading boxes from the back of a rented truck, shivering in my thin sweater. The wind had a bite to it, even though it was only late September. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, just far enough from town to feel isolated. The previous owner had left some furniture behind, a sagging couch, a heavy wooden dining table, a bed frame in the main bedroom. It smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Not exactly mold, but something damp, something lingering. The real estate agent had warned me about the quirks. The floors creaked no matter where you stepped, the pipes rattled when the water ran, and the wiring was temperamental, a polite way of saying the lights flickered at random. I didn't mind. It was a fresh start, something I desperately needed. I was unpacking when I first met Mrs. Hadley. She was my only neighbor, living in the house across the narrow road. I heard her before I saw her, the slow shuffle of footsteps on gravel, the rhythmic tap of a cane. I looked up from my box of kitchenware to see her standing at the edge of my driveway. She was small, bundled in a thick cardigan despite the mild weather, with a face lined by age and something else, something heavier than time. She watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're the new tenant," she said after a long pause. I brushed my hands on my jeans and nodded. "That's me. Just getting settled." Her gaze flicked to the house behind me. "Did the agent tell you about it?" I frowned. "Tell me what?" She sighed, shifting her weight onto her cane. "People don't stay long. Last one left in the middle of the night. Before him, a young couple. Didn't even last a month." I let out a short laugh, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "Yeah. Bad plumbing or just bad vibes?" She didn't smile. "Strange things happen in that house," she said instead. "Footsteps when you're alone. Whispers at night. And the dreams?" I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Dreams?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just be careful," she muttered. "House has a way of getting inside your head." With that, she turned and hobbled back to her own home, leaving me standing there with my stomach knotted tight. I told myself she was just an old woman with too much time and too many stories. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind scrape against the windows, I wasn't so sure. The first few days were quiet, mostly. During the day, the house was almost pleasant. I spent hours unpacking, rearranging, making the space my own. The sunlight filtered in through dusty windows, giving everything a warm, golden glow. I found a coffee shop in town that made a decent latte. I even started to enjoy the solitude. But the nights were different. The first time I heard it, I had been asleep. A deep, heavy sleep, the kind that leaves you groggy and disoriented when something wakes you up. I didn't know what had pulled me from my dreams at first. The house was still, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears. Then, just as I was about to close my eyes again, a creak, a long, slow groan of wood shifting under weight. I held my breath. The sound had come from the hallway just beyond my bedroom door. I told myself it was nothing. Houses settle. Wood expands and contracts. Old pipes make noise. I repeated these things in my head as I lay in the dark, listening. Then, another creak. Closer this time. I sat up, my heartbeat a hammer against my ribs. I strained my ears, waiting for another sound. Step. A whisper. Anything. Nothing came. After what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself it was in my head. That maybe Mrs. Hadley's stories had gotten to me more than I wanted to admit. I forced myself to lie back down. I didn't sleep again that night. By the end of the first week, I had learned to ignore the little things. The occasional sound at night. The way the light in the hallway flickered no matter how many times I changed the bulb. The cold spot near the bottom of the stairs that never seemed to go away even when the rest of the house was warm. I told myself it was all normal. Old houses were weird. That was all. Then I found the basement. I hadn't even realized the house had one. The door was hidden behind a heavy wooden cabinet in the kitchen. I only found it because I dropped a spoon, and when I bent down to grab it, I saw the edge of a door frame behind the furniture. Curious, I pushed the cabinet aside, revealing a narrow door with a rusted handle. It took some effort to pry it open. A gust of cold, stale air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else. Something faintly metallic. I hesitated. Something in me whispered that I shouldn't go down there. But curiosity won. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended, the dim light from the kitchen barely reaching the bottom. The basement was small, lined with crumbling stone walls. Empty except for an old workbench covered in dust and something that looked like dried wax. I stepped further inside, running my fingers over the rough surface of the table. There were scratches in the wood, deep gouges like someone had carved symbols into it. Goosebumps prickled along my arms. Then I saw the book. It sat in the far corner, half hidden beneath a sheet of mildewed fabric. The cover was cracked leather, stained with age. No title. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Something about it made my skin crawl. I should have left it there. Should have closed the basement door and never looked back. Instead, I carried it upstairs. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't stop at my door. They kept going, right up to the side of my bed. And then, ever so slowly, I felt the mattress dip, like someone had just sat down beside me in the dark. I didn't move. The air around me felt wrong, too still, too heavy, pressing down on my chest like a weight. I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The dip in the mattress was unmistakable, the faintest shift in the bed as if someone had settled in beside me. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, shallow, uneven, barely there. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe the old springs in the mattress shifted on their own. Maybe I wasn't fully awake. Maybe. The bedsheets tugged. Not much. Just the smallest, slowest pull, like fingers curling around the fabric near my feet. My body locked up, every muscle tense so tightly it hurt. I couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the pressure lifted. The mattress rose back to normal, the sheets slackened, and the cold air in the room seemed to pull away from me. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring into the dark, afraid to move. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, though I don't remember when. I woke up the next morning with the book still on my nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at it. I should have gotten rid of it. Should have taken it outside and burned it. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for it, and I opened it. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, covered in dense, spidery handwriting. Some of the ink had bled over time, smudging in places, but the words were still legible. The first few pages were filled with notes. I recognized the name immediately. Edwin Harrow. I'd heard it before. It was in the listing, buried in the history of the house. He had been the original owner over 100 years ago. A recluse. An academic, some kind of historian, or maybe something else. The records were vague. But the notes in this book? They weren't the kind a historian would write. The first page was a collection of dates, scribbled over and over in the margins. Some crossed out, others circled. Beneath them, a single sentence. Asterisk, the door is weaker now. I must be careful, asterisk. I turned the page. More writing, frantic, rushed. Asterisk, the sounds are growing louder. It is listening, asterisk. Another page. Asterisk, a sacrifice is required. Blood for passage, asterisk. I slammed the book shut. The words swam in my head, sending a pulse of nausea through my stomach. I didn't believe in this kind of thing. Not really. But the unease slithered under my skin anyway, burrowing deep, making my fingers twitch with the urge to throw the book as far away as possible. Instead, I shoved it into the bottom drawer of my nightstand and tried to pretend it wasn't there. That night, I dreamed. I was standing in the basement. The air was thick, damp, pressing against my skin like a wet cloth. Something was whispering. I couldn't see them, but they were all around me, soft voices threading through the darkness, too quiet to make out the words, but I could feel them inside my skull, curling around my thoughts like fingers. The book was on the workbench, open. The pages fluttered even though there was no wind. Then, a sharp, sudden noise. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Coming down the basement stairs. I tried to turn around. Tried to see who, or what, was behind me. But I couldn't move. The whispers grew louder, rising to a feverish hiss, until they were all I could hear, all I could think. I woke up gasping. The room was dark. Silent. But the book wasn't in the drawer anymore. It was sitting on my nightstand. Open. On a page I hadn't read yet. Asterisk, it is watching. It knows when you sleep, asterisk. A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the book shut again, shoved it back into the drawer, and this time I locked it. Then I left the bedroom, needing to clear my head. I spent the next day convincing myself I had moved the book in my sleep. Sleepwalking. Stress. The power of suggestion. Anything was better than the alternative. I buried myself in small tasks. Grocery shopping. Cleaning. Rearranging the furniture, as if shifting the space could shake off the lingering unease. By the time evening rolled around, I almost felt normal again. Almost. I had just sat down with a cup of tea when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic creaking. Not the usual settling sounds of the house. Not the wind outside. This was different. This was the sound of footsteps. Coming from upstairs. I froze. My mug trembled in my hands. It wasn't just a few quick creaks. It was a slow, deliberate pattern. Step, pause, step, pause. As if someone was moving carefully just above me. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking. And then, the footsteps stopped. Right above me. Directly overhead. My breath came shallow and fast. The ceiling groaned like weight shifting against the old beams. Something was up there. Or someone. I forced myself to move. I grabbed the fireplace poker from the hearth, gripping the cold metal tight, and made my way to the stairs. Each step felt heavier, like wading through deep water. The hallway at the top was dark. I hadn't turned on the lights, but the dim glow from the street lamp outside cast long, thin shadows through the windows. The bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it. The locked drawer. The book inside. I stepped inside, my heart hammering. The drawer was open. The lock wasn't broken, just undone. And the book? The book was on the bed, open to a new page. This time there was only one sentence. Let me in. I dropped the poker. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Instead, I sat awake in the living room, every light on, my back against the wall, waiting for the sun to rise. Waiting for whatever was in that house to make its next move. I left the house first thing in the morning. Didn't bother showering, didn't eat breakfast, just grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and drove into town. The sun was barely up, the streets still empty except for the occasional early riser walking their dog. I parked outside a diner and sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. The book, the whispers, the footsteps. I could almost explain away the noises. Old houses made sounds, floors settled. But the book? The way it moved, the way the pages seemed to turn to exactly what I wasn't supposed to see? That wasn't something I could rationalize. I kept seeing those words over and over again in my mind. Let me in. I shuddered, rubbing my arms to shake off the cold creeping up my spine. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But if it wasn't, then why did I feel like I wasn't alone even now? The bell above the diner door jingled as I stepped inside, the warmth of coffee and frying bacon rushing to meet me. The place was small, old-fashioned, the kind of spot where the waitresses knew everyone by name. I slid into a booth in the corner, away from the windows, and tried to pretend I wasn't shaken to my core. A few minutes later, a woman in her 50s with short, graying hair and tired eyes stopped by my table. Her name tag read Gail. Morning, hon, what can I get ya? Coffee. I don't know, whatever's hot. She nodded, scribbled something on her notepad, and hesitated. You new in town? I ran a hand through my hair, realizing I must have looked as bad as I felt. Yeah. Moved in last week. Her eyes flickered with something, recognition maybe, or hesitation. Whereabouts? I hesitated, then sighed. The old house on Ridgeway. She went still. For a long moment she didn't say anything. Then finally she exhaled, shaking her head. You should talk to Hadley. Mrs. Hadley? She nodded. If anyone knows what's wrong with that house, it's her. I opened my mouth to ask more, but she had already turned and walked away. Mrs. Hadley wasn't outside when I got back. Her curtains were drawn, her front porch empty. I stood at the end of her driveway, debating whether to knock. Then I heard the creak of a door opening. You look like hell. I turned. She was standing in the doorway, watching me with that same unreadable expression. I need to talk to you, I said. She sighed, stepped aside, and gestured for me to come in. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books. The furniture was neat, the walls lined with framed photographs, some so faded I could barely make out the faces. She led me to the kitchen, motioning for me to sit while she poured tea from a chipped kettle. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to steady myself. "I found a book," I said finally. "In the basement." She didn't look surprised. "Edwin Harrow's?" I nodded. She sighed again, setting her cup down with a soft clink. "That house was never right," she said. "Not even when it was first built. Harrow, he was a scholar, but not the kind that belongs in libraries. He studied things he shouldn't have. Did things he shouldn't have." I swallowed hard. "Like what?" Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. "Rituals, summonings, trying to reach beyond the veil or whatever nonsense he believed in. People in town thought he was just eccentric at first. But then," she paused. "Then they started hearing things, seeing things. Visitors would leave in a hurry, refusing to come back. And Harrow, he changed." A chill prickled along my arms. "Changed how?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "He stopped sleeping. Or if he did, he didn't seem to rest. People saw him talking to himself, muttering things under his breath as if someone was whispering in his ear. Then one night he ran out of that house screaming. Right into the middle of town, babbling about doors he couldn't close, things he had let in." I shivered, gripping the mug tighter. "What happened to him?" She exhaled. "Disappeared. No one knows how or where. One day he was just gone." The silence stretched between us. Then, finally, I forced myself to ask, "Do you believe it? The stories?" Mrs. Hadley held my gaze for a long time before answering. "I believe that house doesn't want to be empty," she said, "and neither do the things inside it." I barely slept that night. Every creak, every shift of the house made my skin crawl. I locked the bedroom door, pushed the dresser in front of it. Still the whispers came. Not words, just soft, distant murmurs, threading through the darkness, pressing against my skull. Then, the sound of something dragging across the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't real. I had to believe that. I had to. But then the temperature dropped. The air grew thick, suffocating. And that feeling, that awful, unbearable feeling. Something was standing on the other side of the door. Watching. Waiting. The whispers swelled, growing louder, closer. Then, silence. And then, a single knock. Soft, gentle. Like a request. Like a question. "Let me in." I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knock came again. And then, the doorknob turned. I stared at the doorknob, my breath caught in my throat. It was moving. A slow, deliberate turn, the metal groaning as if whatever was on the other side wasn't in any hurry. I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, like I was submerged in ice, my limbs numb and useless. Then the whispering started again. Not from outside the door. From inside the room. Right behind me. A sharp, shuddering gasp ripped from my throat as I spun around. The darkness felt thicker, heavier, like something unseen had just been standing too close, just out of sight. I fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand and flicked it on. The light flooded the room, chasing the shadows into the corners. Nothing was there. The whispering stopped. The doorknob stilled. But I could still feel it. That wrongness in the air. That sense of something lurking just beneath the surface. Waiting. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. 3:12 a.m. The night stretched on endlessly, every second dragging like molasses. I wasn't going to sleep again. I didn't even try. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The first rays of sunlight barely peeked through the curtains before I was up, moving the dresser away from the door with stiff, unsteady limbs. I hesitated before opening it. I didn't want to, but I had to. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled different, stale, like something had been left to rot. A sickly sweetness just faint enough to make my stomach turn. I checked every room, every closet, every corner, even though I knew I wouldn't find anything. Whatever had been there last night hadn't needed to open doors to get inside. It had already been in the room with me. I spent most of the day researching Edwin Harrow. The more I found, the worse it got. His studies weren't just in history. They delved into something older, something darker. He had spent years obsessed with a specific belief, that there were places in this world where the barriers between the living and the dead were thinner. And Ridgeway House had been one of them. There were rumors, buried in old newspaper clippings and forgotten records. Accounts of strange occurrences dating back to before Harrow even lived there. People seeing figures in the windows when the house was empty. Neighbors hearing voices, laughter, or the sound of furniture moving on its own. And then there was the most unsettling piece of all, an article from 1924. A missing persons case. The article didn't give many details. A young woman named Margaret Wells had been staying in the house, one of the only known tenants after Harrow disappeared. She had been in town for less than a month before vanishing without a trace. The last person to see her? A neighbor who claimed to have heard her screaming in the middle of the night. But when they went to check on her, the house was empty. All her belongings were still inside. The doors were locked. No signs of forced entry. As if she had never left. Or as if something had taken her. I closed my laptop, rubbing my temples. My head throbbed. I hadn't eaten all day, my stomach twisting with something that wasn't quite hunger. I needed to get out of that house. At least for a little while. The air felt thick, suffocating like the walls were pressing in. I grabbed my jacket and left. The evening was cold, but the fresh air cleared my mind. I walked aimlessly through town, just letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted. The streets were quiet, the storefronts bathed in the warm glow of streetlights. At some point I found myself outside the library. It was a small brick building with high windows and an old-fashioned wooden door. On impulse I went inside. The librarian barely glanced up as I stepped past the desk. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers absent-mindedly over the spines of old books, not really sure what I was looking for. And then I saw it. A single, thin volume tucked between thicker books on a forgotten shelf. It had no title on the spine, no markings on the cover. Just aged leather, cracked and worn. I pulled it out and flipped it open. The handwriting was eerily familiar. Edwin Harrow. I turned the pages, my breath catching as I skimmed the words. I have heard it whisper my name. Asterisk, it moves in the dark places, watching, waiting. It does not sleep. It does not leave asterisk. Asterisk, the doors are thinning. Soon it will step through asterisk. My fingers trembled. I turned another page. And stopped. The ink was darker here, the handwriting frantic, almost illegible. It must not be invited. Asterisk, no matter what it says. No matter what it asks, asterisk. My blood ran cold. I could still hear the knock from last night. The slow, patient turn of the doorknob. Let me in. I shoved the book closed, my breathing uneven. I didn't want to read any more. I put it back on the shelf and left the library without another word. I got home just after dusk. The house loomed against the darkening sky, its edges blurred by the fog rolling in from the woods. I hesitated at the front steps. The feeling was worse tonight, like the house was waiting for me. I swallowed hard and went inside. The second I shut the door, I knew something was wrong. The air was colder than before, the silence heavier. The lights felt dimmer somehow, the shadows in the corners stretching too far. I took a slow step forward. The floor creaked beneath my weight. And then, from upstairs, a whisper. My breath hitched. It wasn't distant this time. It was close. Too close. And then, the sound of something moving. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth. I backed away, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The footsteps stopped. A long, horrible silence stretched through the house. And then, a soft knock. Not at the front door. Not at a window. From upstairs. From inside my bedroom. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the whimper rising in my throat. Then, the whispering started again. Louder this time. And for the first time, I understood what it was saying. Let me in. The air in the house shifted. And then, the bedroom door creaked open. I didn't move. I couldn't. The bedroom door upstairs had creaked open on its own, slow and deliberate, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. Something was in there. Waiting. The whispering hadn't stopped. It slithered through the air, curling around me, almost gentle. Let me in. No. I took a step back. Then another. My body screamed at me to turn and run, but I knew, somehow I knew, that if I did, it would follow. I had to see it. I had to know. Heart hammering, I forced myself up the stairs, one slow, agonizing step at a time. Each creak of the wood beneath my feet felt deafening, like I was announcing my presence to whatever was in that room. The door was open just a crack, darkness spilling out from within. I reached out, fingers trembling, and pushed it open. The room was empty. No, not empty. Wrong. The air felt thick, almost alive, pressing in on me from all sides. The shadows clung to the corners, darker than they should be, like something was hiding just beyond my vision. And the smell. That same sickly sweetness from before, stronger now, suffocating. I took a shaky step forward. The floor groaned beneath me. The whispering stopped. And then, a breath. right behind me. I spun around, my stomach lurching, expecting, what? A face? A shape? Nothing. But the air was colder now, and the door. It had closed. No, I hadn't touched it. I rushed forward, grabbed the doorknob. It didn't move. Locked. I yanked harder, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The walls felt closer, the darkness pressing in, swallowing the edges of my vision. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper. Not a voice this time. A sound. Fingernails dragging against the wood. I choked on a sob, slamming my fist against the door. Let me out. The scratching stopped. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. And then, a single soft knock. Let me in. I screamed. I don't know how long I was trapped in that room. Minutes. Hours. Time blurred together in the dark. I must have passed out at some point because when I opened my eyes, the room was different. Brighter. Morning. The door was open. I stumbled out, legs weak, head pounding. My skin felt ice cold, like I had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere that wasn't this house, wasn't this world. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I did remember the whisper. And I knew with a sickening certainty that I hadn't dreamed it. It had been real, and it was getting closer. I left the house again. Didn't shower. Didn't eat. Just got in my car and drove. Mrs. Hadley answered on the second knock. One look at me and her face tightened. You saw it? I swallowed, my throat raw. I think so. She sighed, stepping aside. Come in. The warmth of her house was jarring, too normal, too safe. I felt like a wild animal stepping in from a storm, my skin still crawling with that thing's presence. I sat at her kitchen table, hands gripping the edge to keep them from shaking. What do you know? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I told you Edwin Harrow disappeared? I nodded. That wasn't entirely true. My breath caught. What do you mean? She exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. They never found his body, no. But people heard things. Strange noises from inside the house, long after he was supposed to be gone. And the ones who went looking, she shook her head. They didn't come back. My stomach twisted. Who? She hesitated. Margaret Wells was one. But there were others. People who lived there briefly. They didn't just move away, they vanished. I felt sick. And the whispers? I forced out. She met my eyes, something dark and knowing behind hers. It wants someone to let it in. The words sent a fresh wave of cold through me. She leaned forward. Have you spoken to it? I shook my head violently. No. Her gaze stayed fixed on me, sharp, searching. Are you sure? I opened my mouth. Stopped. Because I wasn't sure. It hadn't been words, not really. But the moment in the room, the fear, the panic, had I thought something in response? Had I answered it in some way? I didn't know. And that terrified me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You need to leave that house. I let out a shaky breath. I was thinking the same thing. She didn't look relieved. If it's already inside, she said quietly, leaving might not be enough. A chill spread through my bones. What do you mean? She didn't answer. I went back, but only to pack. I wasn't staying another night. I moved fast, shoving clothes into a bag, grabbing essentials, barely able to breathe in the thick, heavy air. I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. As I turned to leave, my gaze landed on the book, the one I had found in the basement. It wasn't where I had left it. It was on the floor, pages open, fluttering slightly as if disturbed by a breeze. No, not a breeze. Something breathing. I stared at it, my chest tightening. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I stepped closer, forcing my eyes down. The ink had changed. The words were different. A single line, scrawled in frantic, looping handwriting. It is already with you. The air in the room dropped to freezing. A breath, hot and damp, stirred the hair on the back of my neck. And then, a voice right at my ear. Let me in. I ran. I didn't stop to grab the book. I didn't stop to close my suitcase. I didn't even stop to look back. I bolted down the stairs, through the hall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The walls felt narrower, the house stretching, shifting, the floor beneath me warping like something was breathing under the wood. The front door. It was open. I hadn't left it open, but I didn't care. I flew through it, practically tumbling down the front steps. Cold air slapped my face, shocking me back to reality, but even then I didn't stop. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys, my fingers shaking too hard to fit them into the lock. I didn't see anything behind me, but I felt it. The heavy, suffocating presence standing just beyond the threshold. Watching. Waiting. I forced the key in, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, locked the doors, started the engine, and peeled out of the driveway without looking back. I didn't know where I was driving. I just needed to go. The roads blurred together, headlights flashing past in streaks of white and red. My breath came fast and uneven, my fingers clenched too tight around the wheel. I could still hear it, whispering, scratching, breathing. I didn't stop until I was parked in front of Mrs. Hadley's house. I barely remembered getting out of the car, barely remembered knocking. She answered almost immediately. One look at me and she pulled me inside. I told her everything. The whispers, the knocking, the feeling of something in the house, pressing closer, closer, waiting for me to let it in. The book, the final message. It is already with you. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she sighed. I was afraid of that. My stomach twisted. Afraid of what? She got up, moving to a shelf on the far wall. I hadn't noticed it before. Old books lined the wood, their spines cracked and faded with age. She pulled one down, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Then she turned the book toward me. A drawing. Faded ink, rough lines. But even in its simplicity, the image was wrong. A door. But not just any door. The wood looked warped, the frame too tall, too narrow, bending inward like it was being pulled into itself. And beneath it, something crouching. Just a shape, nothing distinct. No face, no features. Just black, curling into the door like smoke. But the worst part? The words written beneath it. It does not need the door to open. My mouth went dry. Mrs. Hadley sat back down, folding her hands. I told you that Edwin Harrow believed there were places in this world where the barrier was thin. I nodded, my heart hammering. She tapped the page. This house, your house, is one of those places. I swallowed. But Harrow did something worse, she continued. He didn't just study it. He wanted to use it. Wanted to open it further. A cold knot tightened in my gut. He tried, she said softly. But the thing about doors is, once you open them, you can't always close them again. I felt sick. So you're saying it's already? Yes. She met my eyes. It's already here. And if it's been speaking to you, if it's been trying to get in, it means it wants something from you. A shudder ran through me. Let me in. I thought of the whisper behind my ear. The hot breath against my skin. I wrapped my arms around myself. Then what do I do? She was quiet for a long time. Then she shook her head. I don't know. I stayed with her that night. She insisted. I didn't argue. But sleep didn't come easy. Even in the safety of her house, my skin prickled with unease, my ears straining for sounds that weren't there. Or maybe they were. Because in the quiet, in the empty dark, I still heard it. A whisper. Soft. Patient. Let me in. I turned on the lamp and didn't turn it off again. I couldn't avoid the house forever. The next morning I drove back. Not to stay. Just to pack the rest of my things. Mrs. Hadley offered to come with me, but I said no. I needed to do this alone. The house stood exactly as I had left it, looming against the dull, overcast sky. But something felt different. It was too still. Too quiet. I stepped inside. The air was heavy. The smell was stronger now, that sickly sweetness curling against my skin. I moved fast, shoving the rest of my things into bags, barely able to breathe in the thick silence. The walls felt closer. The house felt smaller. It knew I was leaving, and it didn't like it. I dragged my suitcase to the door, and then, a sound, from upstairs. My heart stopped. Slow, deliberate, footsteps. No, not footsteps. Something dragging. My breath hitched. I clutched the doorknob, my entire body screaming at me to go, go, go. And then, a whisper. Not from upstairs. Not from outside. From right behind me. Don't go. A cold breath against my neck. A single light touch on my shoulder. I wrenched the door open and ran. I didn't look back. Didn't stop. Didn't even let myself breathe until I was miles away. Only then, in the safety of a cheap motel room, did I let the weight of it crash down. I had escaped, but it didn't feel like I had won, because deep down I knew this wasn't over. It had followed me, and it was still waiting for the moment I finally let it in. I froze. The air around me thickened, the room shrinking in on itself. The thing, whatever it was there, so close I could feel it breathing, could feel its presence pressing into my skin, crawling beneath my ribs. Let me in. It wasn't a voice anymore. It was a feeling. A pull. A need. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like the very air in the room was being sucked out, replaced with something darker, colder. I didn't dare look. I couldn't. But I could feel it. I could feel it moving, shifting. The floor beneath me groaned as if it was waking up. The walls felt like they were closing in each inch, each second, until I would be crushed by the weight of it all. I tried to move. Tried to take a step, but my feet wouldn't obey. My legs were rooted to the floor, a growing sense of dread anchoring me in place. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. My body was frozen, trapped by the weight of the thing. The whispers, the dragging. The thing behind the door, it was inside me now. It was all around me. I could feel it crawling through my veins, pushing into my mind, coiling itself around my thoughts. It was pulling at me, making me want to let go. Let it in. Let me in. The voice, no, not a voice, but a sensation, swallowed everything. There was no escape, no safe place. I could feel its hands, cold and invisible, on my skin, creeping under my clothes into my heart. And then a word. A single word that wasn't spoken, but felt in every fiber of my being. Stay. I gasped, choking on the air that didn't come. And in that moment, I understood. I felt it deep inside me, like a twist in my gut, like something had broken. The house wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was a door. A door that opened not just into the house, but into me, into my mind. The thing didn't need to find a way in. It had already found the key, and it was me. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling, the room around me spinning. My heart felt like it was going to tear itself out of my chest. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember who I was, what I was supposed to do. All I could feel was the cold, the weight, the thing, and then, crack. A sound like glass breaking, splitting the thick, suffocating silence. I looked up, my eyes tearing away from the dark corner where the thing had been, toward the door. It was closed, but it wasn't the same. The wood, once black, warped, had started to peel away, like something inside it was pushing to get out. The door trembled, shaking with an unnatural life. Let me in. The whispers came again, louder now. Not from behind the door. Not from the shadows. But inside my mind. It was me, my own thoughts. No. Was it? The thing that was crawling inside me. The thing that had been waiting for me to break. It had won. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care if the thing was following me or if the house was collapsing behind me. I just ran. Out the door. Down the stairs. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it catch me. I didn't even slow down when I reached my car. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and gunned the engine. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't grip the wheel. The road was a blur, the trees and buildings flashing past, but I didn't care. I didn't even know where I was going. I just had to get away. Had to escape. But I knew in my gut that it didn't matter. Because it wasn't just the house anymore. It was in me. It was always going to be with me. I don't remember how much time passed. The miles, the hours, they blurred together. I only remember the growing feeling of being followed, of being watched. It was there. It was always there. And no matter how far I drove, I could feel it. Feel it tightening around me, pressing in, wrapping its cold fingers around my heart. I pulled over at a gas station. I needed to breathe. I stumbled out of the car, my head spinning, the world tilting dangerously around me. I had to get away. But it was everywhere. It was in the air. It was in my skin. I tried to walk, but my legs gave out beneath me and I collapsed against the side of the car, clutching at my chest. I could feel it again. That cold breath, that weight, that pulling. Let me in. I gasped, choking on the air that wasn't air. The whispers were louder, swirling around me, drowning me. And then, a shadow. A figure. A man standing in front of me. I tried to focus, tried to make out his face, but it was blurred, distorted, like I was seeing him through a fog. He took a step forward. I didn't move. It's already inside you. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. But the voice wasn't his. It was mine. It's already inside you. The figure smiled. And I knew. I knew what it meant. The house wasn't done with me. It was just waiting for me to come home. I never should have gone back. I know that now. But at the time when I was standing there outside my car, staring at that strange, foggy figure, I thought I had no choice. The fear had swallowed me whole, and I believed, truly believed, that if I didn't confront whatever was haunting me, it would follow me forever. But now I wish I'd kept running. I wish I'd stayed far away from that cursed house, from everything it represented. Because the truth is, I can't escape it, The man in front of me didn't seem real. His face was blurry, fading in and out of focus like a mirage in the heat. I tried to lift my head to look at him, but it was as if the air itself was pushing me down, pressing me into the ground. My body didn't want to move. I tried to speak, but my voice was gone. "Let me in." The whisper came again, not from the figure in front of me, but from everywhere. The voice wrapped around me like a chain, pulling me closer to the figure, drawing me in. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me, flicking upward. His smile was twisted. "It's already inside you." The words weren't comforting. They were suffocating. I gasped, clutching at my chest, feeling the pressure, the tightness in my ribs. The air was too thick, too dense to breathe. I tried to move, tried to get away, but my legs wouldn't listen. I couldn't even look away from that figure. "Don't fight it." I heard the words clearly now, like they were in my ear, soft and hypnotic. The whispers became a chorus, filling every inch of the empty air. I shut my eyes tight, but it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, and I felt something cold and dark touch the back of my neck. "You don't have to fight it. Let me in," I screamed. The sound tore through me, but when I opened my eyes, the man was gone. And so was the fog. I was alone. I stood there, trembling for what felt like an eternity. The emptiness around me was suffocating, and yet it wasn't quiet. The whispers were still there, fading in and out like the hum of a broken radio. I don't know how long I stood there. Time was meaningless. The world around me felt like a dream, like nothing was solid. Like everything I touched would dissolve into nothing. I stumbled back to the car, barely able to move, my hands shaking too much to open the door. I climbed in, slamming it shut behind me, locking the doors, pressing my back against the seat. But even inside the car, it didn't stop. I could still hear it. "Let me in." I drove without thinking. I couldn't stop myself. My hands gripped the wheel too tight, and I didn't care where I was going. All I could hear was the whispering, louder now, filling the space around me like a cloud. It was getting worse. The house had already opened the door, and now it was coming for me, crawling deeper into my mind. I didn't know if it was already too late. All I knew was that I couldn't outrun it. At some point, I must have passed out. I don't know how long I was driving, but when I woke up, I was parked in front of the house again. The familiar dark shape loomed before me, the windows empty and staring, like eyes waiting to devour me. I didn't want to go back, but I had no choice. I walked up to the house like I was in a trance, my feet moving without thought, like something else was controlling me. The door creaked open on its own, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house felt the same. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay. The walls were darker, more oppressive. The whispers had become a low hum, vibrating in my skull. I reached for the stairs, and that's when I saw it. The door at the end of the hallway. It wasn't like before. It was wide open now. I felt the cold air rush from behind it, and I didn't have to look inside to know. It was waiting. I stood frozen, staring at the open door. The whispers surrounded me now, filling my ears, drowning out everything else. "Let me in." The words weren't just in my ears anymore. They were inside my head, inside my soul. They were mine. I stepped forward against my will. Every part of me screamed to stop, but I couldn't. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the door, pulling me into its cold embrace. I stepped inside. The room was dark. Too dark. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The presence in the air. I could feel the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down on me. The whispers had turned into a low growl, echoing in the room. It was here. It was me. I reached out, my hand brushing against the cold, smooth surface of the wall. And then, I felt it. Cold fingers on my wrist. A chill that sank into my skin. "Let me in." And I understood. It wasn't the house anymore. It was inside me. I had been inside the house all along. I couldn't move. The cold fingers were still on my wrist, ice cold and unyielding, pulling me deeper into the darkness of the room. I wanted to scream, to rip myself away from the touch, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't listen. My heart thundered in my chest, but it felt as if something was smothering it, squeezing the air out of my lungs. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, swirling around me, inside me. "Let me in." I wanted to pull away. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. There was nothing left to fight with. "It's too late." The voice wasn't outside anymore. It wasn't just a whisper. It was me. I didn't know when it had happened. I didn't know when it had crept in, when it had slithered through the cracks in my mind, but it was there, inside me. And it wasn't just inside. It was me. I could feel it like an extra weight on my soul, like an itch deep within my bones. It had been there all along. The house hadn't called me to it. I had called it, and now it had me. I wanted to run. I needed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring into the dark, where the shadows twisted like smoke, writhing and shifting. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even focus on the room around me. All I could hear was the low hum in my skull, the soft, insistent whispering. Let me in. You've always been mine. You were never meant to leave. The words burrowed into my mind, growing louder, more insistent. I felt something stir behind me like a presence creeping up my spine. Asterisk, you opened the door. You called me an asterisk. I turned. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the thick, choking dark. Asterisk, you can't leave now. You're already here, asterisk. I wasn't sure if I was speaking or if it was the house speaking through me. I felt it all. The weight of the curse, the suffocating air, the pull of something darker, ancient, beyond human understanding. It was inside me, wrapping its tendrils around my thoughts. And I understood. I didn't need to see it to know what had happened. The house wasn't haunted. The house was the door. And now so was I. The temperature dropped. My breath came out in jagged bursts, visible in the cold air that surrounded me. I looked down, my fingers trembling, and realized I could see my own breath, the way it clouded in the air. I should have been terrified. I should have been screaming. But instead I felt empty. The fear had drained away, leaving only this hollow sensation in my chest. And then I felt it, the pull, the tug on my soul. It wasn't physical. It wasn't something I could touch. It was something deeper. Come back to me. You belong to me. I stepped forward, barely aware of the movement. My hands reached out, fingers brushing the walls, the cold wood. I felt like I was sinking, like I was slipping into something darker, something deeper. I stepped forward again, and again. Each step felt like I was falling, like I was stepping into an abyss, 1 foot at a time. Let me in. I heard the voice, the familiar voice, like it was in my ear, inside my mind, every thought, every breath. And then I saw it, in the center of the room. The door. It wasn't the same door. It was bigger, darker. The wood was thick and heavy, cracked in places as if time itself had torn at it. And yet, there was something beautiful about it. Beautiful in the way something cursed is beautiful. Dangerous, dark, filled with promise. You wanted this. The whisper echoed in my mind. I knew it was true. I had wanted this. I had always wanted this. I walked toward the door, drawn to it. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to. Every part of me, every cell in my body, urged me forward. It was waiting for me. Come inside. I reached for the handle. It was cold, slick beneath my fingers as though the door itself had been waiting. It was almost alive, pulsing, breathing under my touch. I twisted the handle. And then I opened it. The world beyond the door wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was nothing. A void, swirling with shadows and whispers. I couldn't see anything, just a deep, infinite blackness stretching farther than I could comprehend. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something too large to understand. The whispers were louder now. They were inside my skull. Let me in. You've always been mine. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The air was thick with darkness, suffocating. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to beg for air, but the voice that was me and not me, was too strong, too deep. You can never leave. I didn't understand at first. But then, it hit me. I had never been outside. The house had never been real. There was no escape. There was no running. There was only the door. And I had opened it. And now I was part of it. The whispers were louder now, swirling, crawling under my skin. And I knew without a doubt that I would never escape. Because the house didn't need me to leave. It had already opened its door. And I had stepped inside. I'm not sure how long I've been here. I think it's been days. Or maybe weeks. Time doesn't feel real anymore. The shadows bend and twist in ways they shouldn't, as if time itself is caught in some strange, looping pattern that doesn't know how to end. The air is thick, always cold, like I'm submerged in something too heavy to bear. I feel like I'm drowning, but I can't even tell if I'm breathing. I've been walking in circles around the same room, through the same doorway, but I never get any closer to where I need to be. It's like everything is trapped in this endless stretch of black. I don't know where the door went. It was right behind me. I know it was. I remember it, the cold metal of the handle, the slick wood beneath my fingers. But now, there's nothing. There's only the darkness. I think I've tried to leave. But every time I walk, it's the same. I turn a corner, step through another door, and I end up back where I started. It's like this place is built on loops, and I'm stuck in one of them. Let me in. I hear it in my mind, in my bones, in the pit of my stomach. That whisper. The voice. It never stops. I thought at first it was just part of the house. Just some leftover curse, some ghostly echo that wouldn't let go. But now I know. It's me. The house isn't haunted. The house isn't cursed. I am the house. I'm starting to forget. I try to remember what it was like before I stepped inside that room, before I opened that door. I try to think about the world I used to know, the things I used to do, the life I had, but it's slipping away from me. I can't hold on to it. All I have now is the cold, the whispers, and the endless stretching darkness. I can't even remember my own name. It doesn't matter, because there's nothing left outside this place. Nothing to go back to. I was never supposed to leave. You were always meant for this. The air here is thick, pressing in on me from all sides like the walls are closing in. I can't breathe. I can't think. The pressure is unbearable, and the whispers are getting louder, more frantic, as though the house is becoming impatient with me. Let me in. I want to scream, but my voice is gone. I want to run, but there's nowhere to go. Every step I take only leads me deeper into the dark. I don't know what will happen if I stop. I don't know if I can stop. I can feel it pulling at me, drawing me and sinking deeper into the darkness. I want to fight it. I want to resist, but I know I can't. There's a door now. It's not the same one. It's different, sharper, more jagged, as though it's been worn down by time, by the endless passing of something terrible. I reach for it. My hand trembles as I touch the handle. It's so cold, colder than anything I've ever felt. It feels like it's been waiting, just like everything else here. Waiting for me to open it. Waiting for me to step inside. I don't want to. I don't want to know what's behind that door. But I can't stop myself. I push it open. The room is familiar. It's the same as before. The same blackness, the same cold. But there's something different now. Something new. The air is heavier. The shadows are thicker. The whispers are louder. And in the center of the room, there's a shape. Standing there waiting. It's tall, thin, the edges blurring like smoke. I can't make out its features, but I don't need to. I can feel it. It's waiting for me. You came back. I can't move. I can't even breathe. The air feels like it's been sucked out of my lungs. I can't speak. I can't scream. I just stand there. Let me in. The words flood my mind. The figure steps forward, and I can feel its presence pressing down on me like the weight of 1,000 years. It's inside me now. It's in my thoughts, in my skin, in my heart. It's everywhere. You belong to me. I don't know how long I've been standing there. I don't know how long it's been since I stepped inside that room. All I know now is that there's nothing outside. Nothing beyond the door. Nothing beyond the darkness. Because I am the house. I am the door. And whatever was waiting for me inside, it's here now. It's me. It's quiet now. Not the kind of quiet you can appreciate, but the kind that presses down on your ears, wraps around your chest, and makes every breath feel like it's too much. There's no sound but my own thoughts, and even those feel distant, like they're echoing from a far-off place I can't reach anymore. I thought the quiet would bring peace. I thought that once everything was over, once the house had taken me completely, I'd feel the finality, the relief of it all. But instead I feel lost. I feel empty. I don't know what happened. I don't know when the house took me, when I became part of it, when the door closed behind me for good. But I know I'm here. And I know I will never leave. The walls are breathing. I don't know how I know that, but I can feel it. I can feel the weight of the house pressing in on me, like the walls themselves are alive, watching me, judging me. The floors creak beneath my feet, but it's not the creak of an old house settling. It's a sound I've grown used to, a sound that seems to know me. Let me in. The whispers are still there, swirling through my thoughts, filling the gaps where my mind used to be. I can feel them in my chest now, like a dull hum under my ribs. It's not just the house that's haunting me anymore. It's me. I can't escape it. I can't escape myself. I used to think I was afraid of the dark, of the things that lived in it, of the things that waited for you when you couldn't see. But now the dark doesn't scare me. I've become part of it. The house has consumed me, swallowed me whole, and I am the shadows now. I am the silence. I am the weight that presses down on everything. And the worst part? I can't remember what it was like before. I can't remember what I was before the door, before the whispers, before the house took me in. But I don't need to, because now I am the house. There are no more doors. I used to think I would find one. I used to think there had to be a way out, a way to escape. But now I understand. There's no way out. There was never any way out. The house is my home now. It always has been. And the door? The door was never meant to let me out. It was meant to keep me in. You opened it. You belong to me. I feel the truth of it now, in my bones, in my blood. The house is inside me just as I am inside it. There is no separation anymore. There is no world outside. The whispers are louder. They're not just words anymore. They're a part of me. I don't fight it. I don't have to. And as the house settles into me, as I settle into the house, I know that whatever was here before, whatever thing I was running from, whatever I thought was haunting me, is now just a shadow of what it used to be. The house doesn't need to haunt me anymore, because I am its echo, and it is mine. Let me in.